All right, let's go ahead and get started. We've got a pretty good attendance so far, and we want to keep everyone on track for today. So I invite you to hear from our next group of community coalitions that we worked with. So last week you heard from our group in Kansas. This week we are hearing from the perspectives of our group in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So before we get there, I'm going to do just a little bit of a background on how we arrived to this point, and we'll walk through one of our publications that was published about a year and a half ago about coalition groups, and then we'll move into hearing from our group in St. Cloud. Today, I'll do an introduction to our initiative, our coordination initiative, and then we'll hear from Chelsea Beednell, also with NADTC. She'll talk about our coordination toolkit that was developed, and then we'll hear from Cherie Wagner and Tony Masters, who have been pretty pivotal in working with our group in Minnesota. And so they'll walk us through their process and their findings and their experience with this process. I first wanted to start with about 2 years ago, we started this coordination committee idea, and it was really born out of an advisory council that we formed with different national partners. And so I listed here some of our remaining members. We had several more, but after some time, they had to go to other commitments. So I wanted to still showcase some of our partners that we've been working with. And as you can see, they're kind of a different mix of different backgrounds and different representations. So we have some Council of Governments, some mobility and access councils out of Denver, Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired. We have an actual vendor or a provider in State Independent Living Council, Department of Transportation, Health and Human Services, and AAA. And so through this group, we've been able to talk through different scenarios on coordination and work through different publications and ideas on how NADTC can build a better awareness of what communities are looking for and what they're experiencing on the ground level. And so from the beginning, once we formed this coordination advisory council, we started talking about what we could do, what's really needed in the community, and we settled on a few different approaches. And so first, we did some listening sessions, and we looked at case studies from across the country. We also did the development of a toolkit, which we'll show in a few minutes. And then lastly, one of our biggest projects was these coalition teams that we're working with. So from the beginning of this initiative, we really wanted to look for two communities that we could work with. And this is directly from the application, and it states, this initiative aims to strengthen partnerships in the community, begin or reinvigorate discussions about transportation, convene a coalition to address transportation barriers, and generate or sustain positive change. And so about a year ago, around this time, we released a letter of interest from our constant contact emailing list or different newsletters that we put out. And we did get a good handful of applicants that were looking for assistance with their coalitions, or either, like I said, begin or reinvigorate their efforts. From that application pool, we had 8 that were eligible. And so by eligible, we were looking at applicants that received 5310 funding or were a part of a group that received 5310 funding, either from the state or directly. And so that's what we were looking for. And that's essentially what NADTC, our focus area is those rural or small urban providers that provide that 5310 partnership. And so from those applications, we settled on 2 coalition teams. Today, we're hearing from ConnectAbility of Minnesota out of St. Cloud. And our other group that we heard from last week, Jayhawk AAA out of Topeka, Kansas. Each of the chosen groups, we set out on a 2-day in-person facilitated conversation. So we didn't start directly with that. We had a lot of pre-planning ideas with each of the groups, talking about kind of the makeup of their group, how their groups are currently functioning, how they work together, and then getting to that 2-day session. As a group, we worked through about 5 different phases where we were first looking at what is the immediate sense of urgency. What are we looking at? What are we trying to achieve in this area, in the region or in the city or the county that we're looking at? Specifically with this group, we're in St. Cloud. And so from that, we, as a group, so the conversation was guided by the group to talk about what is our intended vision with this process? What do we want to see as a group for our community? What are we looking at? And so as a group, each group developed a vision. And from that vision, we directly went right into developing an action plan. And so this action plan really sets a foundation for the group, not just for that day, but it's something that they can take with them, have with them, and work through as a group beyond the time that we are working with them. So it's more of a long range plan that's focusing on current issues. And so within that plan, we're developing objectives that can be looked at from the perspective of using these SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, actionable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And so each of those objectives have steps that can really be specific and measured to the success of the group. And knowing when you're complete with that, having a timeline put on that and everything, so that lends to each of the groups having better outcomes, knowing that they have this measure in place that they can have that timeline, having it being relevant to what they're trying to work on. And throughout the process so beyond that 2 days, throughout the process, they're always encouraged to keep growing the coalition. So if conversation is coming up and they're talking about the need for a certain piece or a certain bit of information, they can, as a group, continue to invite new people to that table, continue to have more conversation with new members and keep growing. And throughout the entire process, this idea of sustainability is built throughout. I talked about the action plan and having these measurable and achievable objectives. And within that, we encourage actual group members to be assigned those tasks. So it's not primarily all on one individual to finish every single task. And so throughout that, you're having different coalition members working on different aspects of this process. And so that, to us, is a really great way to build in that sustainability and making sure that the process is followed through and you have different engagement throughout with all your members. If anybody missed our session last week, our partners in Topeka, Kansas talked about their project, and their session will be posted on our website soon, so you can see what their projects were. But in a nutshell here, their focus was this urban corridor between the Topeka area and the Kansas City area. They had quite a bit of transit providers, like traditional public transportation providers, along with a lot of 5310 sub-providers that were at a variety of different locations, or AAAs, or some of those non-traditional type of transportation providers. Their big focus was how do we coordinate these rides across county lines? How do we cross that imaginary line between the two counties and get people to where they need to go, specifically with a little bit of a focus on healthcare. How do people access those specialty cares that are needed within that hour time frame to get from this area in the county to Kansas City, where there's a lot of specialty clinics. Ultimately, they were able to develop this idea of a toolkit where they would have quite a bit of resources already listed out, the available funding sources, who is eligible, who can apply for those, who can be ready to apply, but also having a lot of data points. So they're pulling data from either state transportation plans or local transportation plans, but also just like information from census data as well. So they had this ready to go toolkit that whenever a funding idea came out, they could be ready. They could have all of this data, all of these ideas in one place where they could just pull from it and have that ready to go. Another piece that they were still developing, and I think it was pretty well on its way, was this marketing strategy on how to then approach new partners, how to approach partners that may be non-traditional, or maybe potential funders or potential partners in this effort of getting people to where they need to go. And they had a really good talking points that they could walk through, and each member understood those different elements. And so together, this was sort of their project. And again, it just sort of built that awareness and that foundation for them to move forward. I talked about some case studies that our coordination advisory committee did early on. This sort of gave it just a foundation of a direction that we needed to go, or different perspectives on what we needed to do as an agency through NADTC. So a lot of this information is on our website at nadtc.org/coordination. And so you can find all of those case studies there. But what we were doing is each of these 4 case studies was hosted and facilitated by one of our advisory council members. And so they volunteered and they led the conversation. They helped us understand what was happening locally, and gave us a better perspective of how coordination is working, how coordination is not working. And so you can find all of those details on our website. And just quickly, the first one was looking at integrating 5 transit programs into one. This next one, they're looking at a very rural, unique geographical challenges in rural Virginia. In Colorado, they were looking at merging transit resources into one centralized website. And then lastly, in Arizona, implementing technology for rides in rural areas. Now I will turn it over to Chelsea Beadnell, and she will run through the coordination toolkit that was also developed by our advisory committee.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon or morning if you're not in Eastern time. Like Jeremy said, I'm going to be walking through the coordination committee toolkit that was developed by the NADTC's Coordination Advisory Council. As Jeremy said, that's made up of a diverse group of people from all over the country. And many of those folks were deeply involved in the creation of this toolkit. Some of them just offered suggestions or tools, some assisted in writing of certain sections. All were involved in discussions at meetings regarding what to include, how to organize the content and proofreading prior to publication. So we want to give a huge thank you to all of the Coordination Advisory Committee members who helped and poured so much into this toolkit that is really, really valuable. So thank you to all of those who were involved in that process. Next slide, please. Throughout the development of this toolkit, it's really divided into kind of 3 different parts, and it's not necessarily intended to be read straight through. If you have an established coordination committee and you're looking for, technical assistance related to one specific thing, don't feel like you have to read the whole thing all the way through because some of the information may not be new. You can look at the index and kind of see what you need to take from it. So always feel free, like you can go through, figure out whatever section you're at with your coalition building and go to that. We're going to walk through kind of the different parts of it here today. The first is an introduction, kind of talking about what I just said, how this was developed and why. And then it goes into a getting ready section of where you would be at the beginning of developing a coalition or coordination committee. And so it discusses things like needs assessments, readiness assessments, environmental scans. Can't stress the importance of not skipping this step at the beginning. If your community isn't ready for something like this, diving right into it may not be the best move. And so you may have to look at how do you build that community readiness related to this coordination committee. It also dives into how you can implement surveys, looking at stakeholder and community asset mapping. Again, all of these things are really fundamental to diving into something of this nature. I think a lot of people in this industry are doers, and so it's easy to skip these things because you want to just dive in and get to the part where you are making an impact on the community. But again, this step really helps to avoid things like wasting resources on something that may not be effective in the first place, or skipping the crucial step of ensuring that your community is ready and that you're addressing the true needs of what exists in your community. This toolkit also has clickable links, so it's a great thing to resource or to access digitally. You'll be able to link to other resources related to the various sections. And so that is a really helpful part of how this toolkit works. And then it also, in each section, you'll see examples of how these have been implemented in other communities. So Jeremy talked about case studies. You'll also, throughout the toolkit, see many examples of how each of these concepts were applied in different scenarios across the country. So that is the part 1. Next slide, please. Part 2 looks at how do you grow the table? How do you get the right people in the right room at the right time? Because that's half the battle. So what does that recruitment process look like? Is it equitable? Are you being intentional with ensuring that you have a wide variety of stakeholders in your community at the table. You, again, want to make sure that you're getting the true perspectives of the folks that are, have a stake in your program, those who are impacted or those who work closely with those who are impacted. They're going to have the best information to inform whatever initiatives come from your coordination committee. And so you want to make sure that that recruitment process is very equitable, and is getting at the crux of who is actually going to be impacted by the work that's happening. You also will find information here about how to do effective communications and messaging out of your coordination committee. Transparency is going to be really, really huge as you're building trust within those stakeholder relationships. And so communication is really vital to that process as well. And then how do you frame that messaging in a way that is going to be appealing to different stakeholders? Most people that are involved in coordination committees are not paid to be there necessarily. And so they are, somewhat volunteering their time to come be a part of something that inadvertently may benefit them in some professional manner or some personal manner. But you really need to make sure that when you are creating messaging related to your coordination committee, it is framed in such a way that makes people want to be involved. And so the toolkit goes into all of that very, very well. Next slide, please. And then part 3 is looking at kind of more of the nuts and bolts of the daily operations, the organization and the planning, and how you develop the structure of your coordination committee. What is the vision and mission statement? Jeremy talked about our process with each of these coordination groups. One of the first things we did was look at what is the vision here? What are we trying to achieve? And so it's very important that as you're going through this process as well, to start there and focus on that. From there, you're going to develop goals, objectives, action plans. This is a really fundamental skill for those people that are coordinating committees like this or facilitating committees like this. Having the ability to generate action plans and delegate those responsibilities and ensure accountability and all that stuff. Really, really important skills for people who are in a facilitation role related to this kind of work. Looking at how do you structure your coordination committee? Are you going to have an executive committee? Are you going to have a chair? What's that going to look like? What is the organizational structure of your coalition or your committee going to look like? How are you going to do public outreach and engagement? All of us are, required to do that at some level, usually because of funding requirements. But also it's just really important to do, again, because, we want to make sure that the people who are going to potentially be using our service are going to be impacted by our services, that they are having opportunities to provide input on how those are developed. So how do you do that? How do you hold effective meetings? Again, a really, really fundamental skill that is so important and often overlooked. But if you don't keep people engaged in your meetings and keep those meetings productive and purposeful, you're going to have attrition with your coalition group. So making sure that those meetings are really, really working well is going to be super important. And the toolkit goes into that. And then all of those things kind of lend themselves to how your committee gets sustained over time and grows over time. And so these just really are, again, kind of those nuts and bolts, tangible skills that folks that are working in this area have to have in order to, be effective in their work. And so this toolkit really puts a lot of that information together in a way that, again, is a tangible and easy to access through those clickable links. So that is kind of everything that I have related to the toolkit. Are there any questions? Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions related to how this toolkit is laid out. Jeremy has also put the link to access that toolkit in the chat. I believe I saw that come through. So you should be able to find that pretty easily. But if you don't save the link today, it's pretty readily accessible on our NADTC's website.
I don't see any questions coming through. So Now we will move on to hearing from our team in from ConnectAbility of Minnesota. So we have Sri Regner and Tony. So they are both representative of this group, and I'll have them introduce themselves and their role, and we'll walk through their efforts as a group. So welcome, Sri.
Thank you. I am Sri Wagner. I'm the Executive Director of ConnectAbility of Minnesota. And I got the pleasure of working with Tony through our RTCC grant program.
Hi, I'm Tony Masters. I'm with Sherburne County Health and Human Services. I'm the manager of our Adult and Disability Services Division. I've been a member of the RTC, goes back, must be close to 2 years at this point. Have been the chair of the RTCC since September, shortly before the workshop that was held.
So ConnectAbility of Minnesota is a nonprofit. We help people with disabilities, but we have a huge passion for transportation. And so MnDOT had approached us about their RTCC program and invited us to apply to be an RTCC lead agency, which we did. The first year that we were in it was revamping the program, and it was really a planning year. The second year, Michelle Lichtig from the MnDOT RTCC helped us identify this grant opportunity and encouraged us to apply for it. So we sent in the application with the intent that the beneficiary with this would be our RTCC, and we were selected. So we were quite delighted with that. This program came in right when we really needed it. When we looked at the purpose of this, the initiations to strengthen partnerships with the community, that's exactly what the purpose of this RTCC is to connect with all the different transportation entities in the 5 counties that we serve, bringing them together, creating that partnership, creating that community, and then reinvigorating what was already happening and developing a stronger network of communication so that we could identify transportation barriers and then find solutions together as a council. The RTCC had been in place for a year. This was a planning stage. Moving into the second year, starting of July of last year, was moving into the action phase. And that's when Tony had stepped up as the chair of the RTCC. And then when we were able to have the 2-day conference in September, Tony was able to be there for the 2 days along with our team members. And I will let Tony share how that experience was.
Sure. So I want to start just a little bit before that. As a member, I was doing a lot of observation, in the meetings that we had, and all of our meetings outside of the workshop itself have been virtual. Just that's an FYI. I had met with Tammy Buttweiler of ConnectAbility of Minnesota shortly before the workshop because I wanted to talk more about what the role of the chair was. And part of our discussions was looking back at that previous year, which was, as I understand it, the planning year, really didn't see a lot of engagement from the council members. And I do see that periodically with meetings that are done virtually. You just don't get the same level of synergy that you do in an in-person meeting. But I understand that planning phase, we really weren't able to take any action steps at that point. And that's, as somebody that wants to do things, that can become frustrating. So with the workshop, that really invigorated the group. It was exactly what was needed. The meeting itself, I can't remember the agenda from day to day, but, establishing a shared vision statement, I think was critical, in just getting people thinking, along the same lines, and in development of the priorities, I think we were able to come to, a consensus in what we felt in our region, what were the important issues that we needed to address. Much of what you'll see with the action steps that were created, the different objectives, so much of it is driven by the labor shortage that we're seeing in our region, which is probably rampant nationwide, but it is pretty profound in our region. When we look at some of the communities on the one side of it, you have a lot of folks that are telecommuters into the metro. And so very diverse populations from some, smaller urban centers to very rural. So very diverse in what those needs look like. But, the common theme across, all of the members was there is a labor shortage that is impacting everything that we're doing. So hence some of the goals that you'll see that were related to, improving marketing for both volunteer and paid drivers. The other thing that didn't exist within our area too was we didn't have a centralized database of the transportation providers that even exist within our region. So much of it was just based upon lived experience. Oh, yeah, I've used this provider for X, Y, and Z. I mean, that's the way that would operate at the county. We may have 3 or 4 transportation providers that we're used to. So the development of that database, on the website was invaluable as well. Along with that is, the different funding streams that help to fund different transportation services, which also, you look at transportation, there are tons of different funding streams from private pay to medical assistance waiver programs. So that was, again, something that had been determined as a priority. Throughout the 2-day session, I just felt like everybody was engaged. The people that were there wanted to be there and had that same passion. Just like ConnectAbility of Minnesota, the county work, we do gaps analysis surveys periodically here. And over the last 22 years, everything I've seen, number 1 and 2 have always been affordable housing and transportation, because they are the hugest needs in our area and they impact everything else that we do. And if you're on this call, you probably understand how valuable transportation is and how it impacts all aspects of somebody's life. And so a common theme within that group was everybody had that same type of mentality too. I think both Jeremy and Chelsea were able to harness that and bring us together to have both, shared vision and establish objectives with people assigned to achieve those objectives, which I think, looking at it from a project management lens was exactly what we needed as well. We left there with objectives, with action steps, with people assigned to do those. And hence the follow-up meetings, we were able to achieve in just a few months the vast majority of our objectives. So I thought it was very successful. And from a selfish standpoint too, this is probably something I'm going to be replicating over and over again for the next, probably through my retirement. And even moving forward, looking at our RTCC, I think the in-person meeting was necessary to get the engagement of all of those folks. And likely moving forward, what we'll need to do is replicate that same experience, both with an in-person meeting. Maybe doesn't need to be 2 days of that, but certainly the council coming together on an annual basis and establishing those objectives, reviewing those objectives, and looking forward as to who's going to be assigned certain tasks. So what I think that's probably what's most valuable to me in the end is we've developed a process that can be replicated year in and year out. And that's our intention to do so as well. With that, I think I'm going to pass it off to Cherie if she has additional comments.
So after the 2-day event, then we went into our regular monthly meetings with the RTCC. Because the RTCC Council is funded through a grant, the grant has specific requirements. And the great thing about this was we were able to merge the objectives of the RTCC grant and the toolkit that we got from the NADTC and the objectives that the council had come up with. And by bringing those together, we were able to more effectively fulfill the requirements of the RTCC grant, to fulfill the desires and wishes of the council. And like Tony said, I mean, this really moved things along very quickly. I feel like the amount of positive momentum and task completion was accelerated exponentially by using the toolkits and having Jeremy and Chelsea on the meetings with us. It kept our team engaged. It kept them on task. Jeremy had done a great job of providing every meeting a recap of where we were and what objectives we needed to be working on, and then being able to layer those with our RTCC objectives really gave us a really solid roadmap of meeting all these objectives. And creating that database on the website that Tony mentioned was one of the biggest ones that allowed us to hit multiple objectives with our RTCC grant. Being able to promote and show public transportation that already existed, to help start developing the plan and getting the information out to develop a volunteer driver program, helping find what we wanted to do as a council together to promote transportation as a professional career, helping recruit volunteer drivers, promoting the programs that existed. Could we have gotten there on our own? Maybe. Definitely not as effectively, not as quickly, and not as engaged as we did with our entire council. So I feel like the toolkit and the way that it was presented and the fact that they didn't just go, okay, here's a great 2-day program, good luck. They stuck with it. They came with us the whole journey. And that is what I think made this a successful program. Seeing them month after month, being accountable, made a really big difference, but then being able to help guide us if we were coming to a stalemate or, hey, what is the next step? And one of the things that was also super beneficial is we had MnDOT representation, who is the lead of the RTCCs, on our meetings. And so we were able to instantly bounce ideas back and forth between our council and the NADTC toolkit and MnDOT directly. And that was able to move things very quickly and navigate. So we weren't going, well, what do you think about this? Well, let's table that. Let's talk about it the next time. Oh, nobody really had a good answer, or that person's not on the meeting that was supposed to do the research on this. And so their engagement in keeping us with the entire process, I would say, is definitely the reason that this was a successful experience for us. And Tony nailed it perfectly. If we can take the same model and apply it year after year after year, the RTCC is going to just be that much stronger and be able to fulfill our personal vision and mission for our region and bring everybody together in a more intentional manner. And like he said too, beyond the RTCC and our council, the takeaway for our individual members to be able to take the same model, the same learning experience into their organizations was definitely a benefit that I don't know that everybody expected. So I would credit the success of our year directly to the fact that we were selected for this grant and that they provided a great 2-day program to get us started, but it was the ongoing follow up with it that made this whole thing successful.
I think I want to add a little bit there. You touched on it, but I think we heard from both groups, both Minnesota and Kansas, that they had talked about some of these ideas before. They had talked about some of the barriers. They had talked about a lot of these things in the past, but it wasn't really until they had someone to guide them, walk them through, put it physically in writing, put it down and put it into place, was when it finally clicked for them. And we heard that from both groups because especially this group, I think, like Tony said, you kind of know what's out there, who does what services, who can provide others. But in my small group discussion, we were more focused on, oh, you do that? Oh, I do that too. But maybe we can talk better. And so it really opened up those conversations to more than just knowing that that agency provides that service, where now, because I even heard conversation about, well, I don't always have room for more volunteers, but I'm looking for volunteers. And so there was that conversation of, well, maybe I could refer these volunteers to you. That way you can use them, and that volunteer service hour doesn't go to waste. And so that was my big takeaway from those 2-day sessions, was just that conversation that just happened naturally between people who may have already knew each other but didn't really have that solid one-on-one conversation.
you know, in my mind, Jeremy, a lot of that is being in person in the same place with people. You can actually have some side conversations and such that maybe deviate slightly from what the speaker's talking about too, that you're able to, one, start developing those relationships, and two, learn of resources you may not know that are available. You know, in that instance that you're talking about, it was Sherburne County's Vet Services Office that is turning away volunteers because they don't need any more volunteers. And but certainly we could give them direction, send them in another direction, and everybody wins.
Right.
And Tony said too, we were a little bit handcuffed because from the very beginning, we've only met virtually. And so having that opportunity of that forced time that we had to commit to this 2-day conference is what really solidified the community of our council and really brought them together. Seeing faces on screens, it's fine, not necessarily having to engage, but when you're in a group and you have that human contact, I really feel like that's what solidified our group and made it so that we could work more effectively together into the rest of this year.
Sri, do you want to talk a little bit more on just a few of the specifics on some of the objectives you were looking at? I know it was mentioned by either of you, looking at ways to recruit volunteers, or so can you talk a little bit more specifically on some of those objectives your group was looking at?
Absolutely. So one of the objectives with the RTCC with MnDOT is volunteer driver program. They're trying to build a stronger volunteer system across the state of Minnesota. So we're directed towards that. And up until now, we've had different agencies that have had driver programs, but not really good communication about who's doing what and what volunteers are available and what aren't and where the needs are. And then how to share which programs were still in existence and which ones were building and which ones weren't. And so by bringing everybody together, we were able to have that conversation, but we also wanted to develop a website that would allow us to have that interactive database. And it was through this conversation that it went from just listing providers to looking at how to utilize it as a tool to help develop the volunteer driver program. So we already knew that we wanted to do a website. It was already accounted for, but how we were going to get there and how we were going to be able to utilize it wasn't really defined before the NADTC conference. Afterwards, we had a much clearer roadmap on how to get there, what we wanted it to do, and how we could use it further. So it was great to see that not only were we working towards this objective, we were able to develop a tool that would hit this objective and talk about the public transportation piece and promote them, and then talk about not only are we trying to recruit volunteers, but we have a shortage of drivers for buses, and how do we use that one tool to help promote transportation as a profession. And that wasn't something that was one of our RTCC goals, but it definitely came out of the conversation from our NADTC monthly ongoing of how we were going to utilize our website. So it was really interesting to me to see that the NADTC helped us identify our goals and intention. The RTCC had preset ones, but working together and collaboratively as a group, we were able to create tools that met both needs, which to me was pretty exciting. Other areas that we had were engaging within our community, and something that Jeremy, you were really helping us with was creating this persona of what that means in our community, because we're 5 counties and each county is very different in the geography and population. And so as we were moving towards a marketing campaign that would support all of the objectives, what did that persona look like? And so you were really helping us direct that conversation so that we could make sure that as we were spending our marketing dollars, we were going to be doing it as effectively as possible. And having the conversation of public transportation, how would this benefit you? Volunteer driver program, how is it going to benefit you? How can we utilize it to promote transportation? How can we use it to talk about our existing transportation that is available? And so that was very beneficial. So as we will be moving forward in the future towards this marketing plan, we have a much better directed and effective and intelligent way to do that, so that we can take those limited dollars and maximize them through all of the different objectives that the council has identified and MnDOT has identified.
Do we have any questions from the group? I think we've kind of talked a lot about the perspective of this group. Is there any questions from the listeners out there?
Jeremy, we must have outwowed them.
Guess so. So yeah, I wanted to also reiterate this idea of kind of that persona that we I had never thought of it in that perspective, but someone in the group was talking about that and really outlining both the persona of who the driver could be, but also who the client could be as well. And so that was a part of their plan, was to think about who a potential volunteer driver could be, or who a potential public transportation driver could be. And so we were even talking about getting testimonials from current drivers, or having them tell their story of how they helped an individual rider, or how they really connected one-on-one with that individual person. Really telling that story to make it more personal, rather than putting up a help wanted sign in the window. It was more of a personal approach to try to attract new and potential riders. And we even incorporated outreach to different organizations that may require volunteer work time, different community colleges, different educational programs that may be looking for future employment. And so we kind of tried to cover all of those bases just to get at that recruitment topic of new drivers. Cool. Chelsea, do you have anything else to add? We may wrap up a little early today.
I don't think so. I just want to appreciate ConnectAbility and RTCC for all the efforts that were put in. I know it was kind of a long process with ups and downs, and I really appreciate you sticking through everything and coming through it in such a positive way in the end. So thank you for all the work that you've put into this effort as well.
Absolutely. We appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So the next steps for us as NADTC, we will be compiling a lot of the data and a lot of information that was collected through this process with both groups from Minnesota and Kansas. And that will be put into a report of such that should be going onto our website. And so we still have a couple more months to finish that out, but that should be published with the next few months. And so that will come out, that way you can have all the details of each group. And we want to put that information on our website so everyone can look at it and view it and learn from their experience. So please look for that, and that should come out through either our newsletter or a different publication that we put out through email. So I will open it up again for questions if there's anything. If not, we can certainly close out for the day. Well, thank you again, Cherie and Tony, for presenting today and working with us. It was a pleasure, and I thank you so much.
Well, I will thank you both as well. You were a pleasure to work with and very effective in your roles. So again, thank you.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.